The nun was standing at the end of the hallway when I first saw her. Her pale face seemed almost human until she slowly tilted her head far beyond what any person's neck should allow. Before I could move, she whispered my name from nearly 50 feet away. The hallway lights flickered violently as the figure remained perfectly still. Her black robes seemed to move on their own despite the complete absence of wind. Then every light went out at once. For several seconds I stood frozen in absolute darkness. When the lights returned, the hallway was empty, but a trail of wet footprints stretched directly toward me. Even now, years later, I still wonder how she knew my name. My name is Daniel, and this nightmare began when I was 28 years old. At the time, I worked as a freelance photographer, specializing in abandoned locations and forgotten buildings. Exploring decaying places had never frightened me before. The story started after my grandmother passed away. While sorting through her belongings, I found a collection of old letters hidden inside a wooden box. Most were ordinary family correspondence, but one mentioned a convent located deep within a remote forest. According to the letter, a nun named Sister Agnes vanished there in 1963. The local community believed she had died, but no body was ever recovered. My grandmother had underlined one sentence repeatedly, as if she wanted someone to notice it. The sentence read, "Do not follow the prayers beneath the chapel." I had no idea what it meant, but curiosity refused to leave me alone. Within days, I began researching the location. The convent had been abandoned for over 50 years. Several reports mentioned strange noises, unexplained disappearances, and sightings of a woman dressed as a nun wandering nearby roads after midnight. Most people dismissed the stories as local legends. I contacted an elderly historian who knew about the building. His voice became uneasy when I mentioned Sister Agnes. He warned me that some places remain abandoned for reasons beyond simple decay. Despite his warning, I decided to visit. Looking back, I often wonder whether my life would be different if I had listened. Some doors should never be opened. The forest surrounding the convent felt unnaturally silent when I arrived. Even the birds seemed unwilling to approach the property. Massive trees blocked most of the sunlight, leaving the building trapped in permanent shadow. The structure itself was enormous and badly damaged. Broken stained glass windows stared outward like empty eyes. The towering bell tower leaned slightly to one side, as though exhausted by decades of waiting. Inside, the air smelled of dust and damp stone. My flashlight illuminated long corridors lined with religious paintings. Many of the faces had been scratched away, leaving only dark scars across the canvases. While photographing the chapel, I noticed strange symbols carved beneath the pews. They looked ancient and completely different from traditional religious markings. Some appeared fresh despite the building's age. That night, I decided to stay inside the convent to document everything. Around midnight, faint singing echoed through the hallways. The voice sounded distant and sorrowful. I followed the sound toward the lower level. The singing stopped whenever I approached and resumed whenever I moved away. It felt as though something was deliberately leading me deeper underground. Eventually, I discovered a narrow passage hidden behind a collapsed wall. The tunnel descended beneath the chapel and vanished into darkness. Strange symbols covered every inch of the stone. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. My flashlight flickered constantly despite fresh batteries. Several times I thought I saw movement just beyond the edge of the light. Then I found an old recording device lying on the floor. The machine should not have worked after so many years, yet it activated the moment I touched it. A woman's voice emerged from the speaker. She repeatedly begged someone not to open a door. Between desperate sobs, she warned that prayers had awakened something beneath the convent. The recording ended with horrifying screams. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of a woman standing beside my bed. Her face remained hidden behind a black veil. The following morning, I returned to the tunnel. At that point, I genuinely didn't know what to do. If you had discovered what I found that night, would you have kept investigating or walked away forever? Let me know what you think before I tell you what happened next. The passage eventually opened into a massive underground chamber. Hundreds of candles surrounded a stone altar covered in dried stains. None of the candles should have been burning, yet every flame danced as if recently lit. Behind the altar stood an enormous iron door. Ancient symbols covered its surface from top to bottom. The markings matched those found throughout the convent. As I examined the door, a voice whispered directly into my ear. The words were impossible to understand, but the tone carried overwhelming hatred. I spun around and found nobody there. Then I noticed dozens of handprints covering the walls. They varied in size and age, suggesting generations of people had touched the stone. Some appeared to have been made with blood. A hidden compartment inside the altar contained several journals. Most belonged to Sister Agnes. Reading them revealed a truth far darker than I imagined. Decades earlier, members of the convent had discovered an ancient chamber beneath the chapel. Instead of sealing it permanently, they began conducting secret rituals. They believed something imprisoned below possessed divine knowledge. Sister Agnes opposed the rituals from the beginning. Her final journal entries described shadows moving independently and voices emerging from empty rooms. She became convinced the entity was manipulating everyone around her. The last entry ended abruptly with a chilling sentence. It simply read, "It wears our faces now." After reading those words, I heard footsteps approaching from the darkness. The nun emerged slowly from behind the altar. Her robes dragged across the stone floor without making a sound. Beneath her veil, two pale eyes reflected the candlelight. At first she appeared human. Then her mouth stretched impossibly wide, splitting far beyond natural limits. Her skin cracked like old porcelain. She spoke with dozens of overlapping voices. Some sounded male, others female, and several sounded completely inhuman. Every voice repeated the same phrase. She tried to lock us away. The chamber began shaking violently. Candles toppled across the floor as unseen forces slammed against the iron door. Something enormous moved behind the metal barrier. The nun removed her veil completely. What remained beneath was not a face, but a mass of shifting features, constantly changing shape. I recognized dozens of expressions appearing and disappearing within seconds. Among them was Sister Agnes. She looked directly at me and mouthed a single word: "Run." The moment I understood her warning, the iron door burst open. A wave of darkness flooded into the chamber. Shapes twisted inside the blackness, forming countless limbs and eyes. The air filled with screams that sounded centuries old. I ran without looking back. Behind me, the nun and the entity collided in an explosion of shadows and blinding light. The entire convent trembled as though it might collapse. I barely escaped before part of the building caved inward. Dust and debris erupted into the night sky. The ground continued shaking for several minutes. When emergency crews arrived later, much of the underground structure had been destroyed. Investigators found no trace of the chamber, the journals, or the iron door. It was as though everything had vanished. The experience changed every part of my life. I stopped exploring abandoned buildings and rarely spoke about what happened. Most people assumed I invented the story. For years, the nightmares continued. I often woke to find muddy footprints near my bed. Sometimes I heard distant singing echoing through empty rooms. One night I discovered something that terrified me more than anything else. Hidden inside my camera was a photograph I never remembered taking. The image showed the underground chamber moments before the collapse. Standing beside the altar was Sister Agnes. She was staring directly into the camera. Written on the wall behind her was a message that had not been there before. The message contained only 4 words. "The door remains open." I still have that photograph locked away where nobody can find it. Sometimes I convince myself the entire experience was a hallucination caused by fear and exhaustion. Then I remember one final detail. Every year on the anniversary of that night, I receive an envelope with no return address. Inside is a single black and white photograph of a nun standing closer than she was the year before. The most recent photograph was taken outside my house, and in the reflection of my window, something else was standing behind me. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Grave Nova Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you in the next nightmare.